I thought Erin was coming. Is Erin in here? Is Erin next door? She did? Yeah. Well, maybe she's coming back with her friend. I hope. But she told me that. So how's everything else going? Good? Pretty good? Do you have morning or night?
Mornings, except on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and Tuesdays and Thursdays I have class from 2 to 5.
Oh, well, that's good.
It's not, it's annoying, not caring.
Annoying.
So
I don't like having classes.
So maybe like you want some.
I would rather have all my
I'm
classes.
the other thing, then you'll have morning section.
So it's like, it's only one class for 2 days, so it's not terrible. If it was on a Friday or a Monday, it was late, I probably would try to change it. It's Fridays, I'm done at 11:50.
That's not bad.
So I'm not complaining.
No.
If I wanted to go home, I could still be home by a reasonable time and have most of my afternoon. Right?
You need the meat and cheese or not? Fran would eat meat and cheese and not the crust.
Yeah, that's what.
Feel free to, because they're heavy on the toppings.
Okay.
Okay?
If I get them for you again.
Okay, Candace.
Yeah.
So Jody is like anti-recording, right?
No, she'll record. She recorded the last one for us.
Okay, well, when she comes on, if she sees that it's recording, I don't think it is because I just logged out. And you know how when you log out, it says, do you want to save this to
Right.
the cloud or the
But
computer?
not if she has control over it.
Okay.
It'll go to her computer, not ours.
And since this is, oh, okay, maybe that's why she's doing it. Maybe she's recording now, even though she's not logged in.
I don't know.
Maybe it just automatically starts recording.
Don't say any microaggressions against me.
Hello, this is the Vincennes University webinar on microaggressions, and I'm here with Joy Gardner and all of you out there having dinner. What's for dinner, by the way? I forgot to ask.
Pizza and spinach salad.
Yummy.
Sounds good. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Joy. Do you want me to start the slides, Joy?
Yeah, you can. Do you all have a copy of the slides, and do you have that copy in front of you?
Yes.
Each of you have a copy? Okay, so we may turn off the slides. That way we can turn off the slides and talk sometime. So throughout the session. So hello again to those of you that I've already had a chance to meet with last year, and if there's anyone here that I haven't had a chance to meet with, that we haven't had a chance to meet with, I'd like to say, nice meeting you. I am Joy Gardner. I have the pleasure of working with Jody sort of as a thought partner when it comes to DEIB, which is diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And we talked about those in one of our previous sessions. Our goal is to make sure that we deliver educational opportunities that are impactful and meaningful and representative of everyone. So today, I'm thrilled that we're going to be talking about microaggressions. But before we start, please know that this is a safe space where all opinions and perspectives will be shared, but it can be shared. We encourage you to share, but we want to make sure that they're shared with respect and confidentiality. And I just want to, give you a couple of suggestions. One is that as we sort of talk about these things, and it may be a little uncomfortable, that you speak, or that we all sort of speak to our own experience instead of speaking in terms of kind of group experiences. So as you share your thoughts, if you would share your authentic experiences, just be very careful about generalities. And then if something is said that is inappropriate, because sometimes we say the wrong thing, but if you say something that's inappropriate, then the way to handle that is just to apologize and to understand that, I don't know if you all have been in situations where you've had people apologize and they say, "Oh, I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings." Well, we're going to assume when we apologize that we have hurt someone. And so that apology would come as I'm sorry that I was hurtful. I'm sorry that what I said was hurtful, as opposed to that sort of, okay, maybe I did, maybe I didn't. So those are my suggestions as we get into this conversation. But the key word here is that it's a safe space. Okay, so now microaggressions. The slide that you have there is the same slide that you have on your sheets, and there's the definition of a microaggression. It's those little statements that you hear about, or that you've been even a victim of, that are hurtful, but they seem to be just a little, they seem to be just a little insignificant. So it's those statements sometimes where you ask yourself, should I be upset? I think maybe I should be upset. That hurt my feelings. It's those everyday sort of slights that members of certain groups receive. It's in kind of these indignities that victims of certain groups receive, that send the message that those folks, those victims, are not worthy, that they are different, that they're other. So in this slide, you'll notice where it says that it's indirect, it's subtle, it can be unintentional, and it's against members of a marginalized group. And are you all comfortable that you understand what we mean when we say a marginalized group? What do you think we're talking about there?
You guys have an example?
And I'm sorry, I didn't hear if someone said
Well, we
something.
have some who do not know what a marginalized group is.
Okay, good. Thank you for that. So when we talk about a marginalized group, we're just talking about a group of folks that typically experiences some kind of discrimination. It can be women. It could be a racial group. It could be one of a marginalized group that we've been hearing about in the news quite a bit in my area of the nation, and I don't know if that's the case in other areas. Jody's in the DC area. You all are in the kind of the mid country, middle of the country. Then we're hearing a lot though about violence against Asian American Pacific Islander individuals. And so what they'll call that sometimes on the news, and when I say they, what the media will call it a lot of times, call that group AAPI. So if you've heard of violence against AAPI, then that's Asian American Pacific Islander. I just kind of threw that in there so you would know. That's another group that's marginalized because of their race. So they're being discriminated against. It could be people who identify as gay. It could be somebody who identifies as Latin X or Latinx, however we word it. But it's a group that is considered a minority group because they tend to be, they're not considered the majority, and they are typically discriminated against. That's what a marginalized group is. So,
and I would just add to that, being part of one of those groups. I'm Jewish, and so there are religious comments that people will make, and it's very uncomfortable. And I used to think I had to deal with it. Now I realize, no, those are microaggressions. So it can come up in all ways, but it's about, as Joy will talk about, even though it's unintentional, doesn't mean it doesn't hurt and isn't wrong.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you, Jody. And what Jody reminds us of is that marginalized groups aren't always visible to the eye. So someone who makes a comment about people of Jewish descent could do that without realizing that Jody's in that group, and that would, obviously be one of those microaggressions, one of those things that would hurt her. I have a vision. I may have said this earlier. Death by 1,000 nicks is what they call it. So imagine, if you can imagine somebody taking a knife and just nicking you. That's sort of the effect of these microaggressions. Some people, if you read about microaggressions, some people will compare them with paper cuts. I think that's and a paper cut does hurt. We know that when we've gotten a paper cut. But I don't think that a microaggression is quite as harmful as I don't think that a paper cut is as harmful as a microaggression. Microaggressions cut really deep, and we'll talk about some of those. And I'm willing to bet that many of us have experienced microaggressions, and I'll be anxious to hear about your experiences with them. So, but let's talk about the forms of microaggressions and the types of microaggressions. First of all, microaggressions can come in many, many forms. It could be someone who just says something to you. And so somebody who just says something, that's considered a verbal form of a microaggression. It could be the way that someone behaves toward you. It could be that you walk by them and they roll their eyes, or they act as if you are offensive. Those are behavioral forms of microaggression. So they don't even have to say anything. It can be the way that they act. One of the things that is considered a microaggression is they've done studies in classrooms, and I'm a former teacher, so I'm always interested in these studies. But they've done studies, and they've shown where teachers will call on or not call on certain individuals from marginalized groups. They might only call on the boys. They might only call a certain gender. They might only call on the girls. So that is an example of a behavioral microaggression. And then there are environmental microaggressions as well. There's been a lot of talk, especially, around the southern states, about statues that glorify Confederate soldiers, people that owned slaves, people that were not supportive of people of color. There have been environmental, there have been posters and things, billboards along the road that have been derogatory towards the LGBTQIA community. So all of those things are environmental microaggressions. Those are the forms of microaggressions. Have you all noticed any of those different forms of microaggressions?
Yeah.
Anybody want to give us an example of that?
I've seen in classes where if they have a learning disability or something, a hidden disability, they'll call them stupid, but they're not stupid. And I think, when you were talking about teachers do that, and I think, I'm hoping they don't do it on purpose, but I think that's wrong, because the definition of hidden disabilities is not that. I've seen that. Our campus is very open for transgender. We've had a lot of training in our program and doing training on campus. Our community is not very ethnically diverse without the students here. Or my area. So I know that one time I had some Black students with me, and we went to a gas station, and they got really nasty looks. And but I corrected them and said, it's not a very kind area at times. So and told them it wasn't their fault.
Yeah, and that was great that you sort of prepared them. But that's absolutely an example of a microaggression. That's a behavioral microaggression where someone gives someone else a nasty look or a hurtful look. Now, microaggressions is sort of a broad term that we use for three types of microaggressions. So there are micro assaults, and that oftentimes are just that's your in your face, your very conscious type of discrimination. It could be, I hate this type of person. It could be, I'm going to physically assault this type of person. I assaulted this person because they're of this race, or because they're part of the LGBTQIA community, or because they are disabled. I'm going to do something to hurt someone, and it's in your face and it's very conscious. Mm-hmm. Then there are micro insults. And those are the things that we kind of talked about when we talk about those, those sort of kind of under the radar comments that are made, those things that can be intentional. Sometimes they're unintentional. Some people will tell you that all microaggressions are unintentional. I don't buy into that, to be honest with you. I believe that microaggressions, I believe that people make mistakes. I believe that there is unconscious bias. I believe that we have sort of these, this bias that we're born with, or that we grew up with, and that we've been taught. And sometimes that comes out in microaggressions. But what I don't believe is that all microaggressions are just, done without knowledge of what people are doing. Then there are micro invalidations. Those invalidations are those things where you are told that, or where a person is told that their concerns about, about some kind of discrimination or some kind of unfair treatment are just not real. Oftentimes it's those statements like, you're being too sensitive, or it wasn't that big a deal. So, or it just doesn't take all of that. It doesn't take getting that upset over it. So those are all things that sort of affect marginalized groups. And these microaggressions take place, you guys, both in professional workplaces and in schools as well. So those of you that are getting ready to go into the workforce, you would hope that once you go into the workforce, those things aren't happening. They are happening in the workforce.
Yeah.
And you'll read about professional environments where they're trying to really address those things. So we're going to talk about these things really in terms of the workforce and in terms of schooling. Now, Jody, you might have a word to say, and then we have a video that we're going to show you about workplace microaggressions.
Great. No, the video is wonderful. As an example, I just wanted to share that those invalidations within our work, the work that Joy and I also do with people with ADHD, with executive functioning problems, with learning disabilities. Sometimes those invalidations, or most times, they stick with you. When someone tells you you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, you will never be able to be something or somebody that you want to be, that doesn't go away. So that's what makes microaggressions so harmful, because not only do those the verbal attacks, the words impact it, but it goes into an emotional level that often the person who is tossing out those insults doesn't think about, wow, I just told somebody that they're never going to graduate, or they're obese and they're never going to find anybody and never have love in their life. Things like that sink in so deep. And in higher education at the college level is a great time to begin to, if you haven't already, to really stand up for what you hear and what you see. So, because you can make a difference for those people. And it strikes me because there's so many different things that have come up over time. Ready for video?
Ready for that video. Mm-hmm.
All right, let's see if I can make this one work. Okay. Come on. Let me know if you can hear when it starts. Let's see. It's coming. Can't hear that, can you?
No.
Okay, hold on. I think I can fix it. Is that any better?
No, we can't, we see it, but it's
Same
not.
problem?
Mhm.
Let me try, because I'm not hearing it either, which doesn't make sense.
Jody, let me know if you want me to play it on our
We
end.
had this problem last time. I don't know why. Can you hear it now?
No,
The video is not playing.
No?
Yeah, I don't even see it moving.
Joy?
Well, I don't see it. Yeah, I don't see it moving.
Oh,
at
now
all.
I can't hear you. Okay,
Oh, wow.
that's, That's my issue. Hold on. Let me. Can you see the slide?
Yeah,
Oh,
now
there
it's
we go.
starting.
Mhm.
We can't hear it. No,
We
can't
cannot
hear
hear
it.
it.
Give her the prompts.
Okay, I'm going to share this in the chat for Justin. Hold on.
Just-
If she mutes herself, mutes the video. And she mutes herself, so she doesn't like make going up the video, but it's mute her video.
There it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are you John?
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Great to meet you.
Can you hear me at all?
Yes.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Mhm.
Yeah, so that was the, an issue with, I guess, with the slide up. Let me just try directly through YouTube.
I think they're playing it now.
I can't hear you.
Oh, is she trying?
But if you're really curious about it, there are YouTube videos out now about natural bears. Check that out. Just try to-
There's no way we're gonna make it to that date.
No. I have no idea what they're thinking. What are you doing this weekend?
Went to the beach with some buddies.
It sounds great. You've already got quite a bit here. Where's your family from? Here. Yeah, before here. Still here. But before that.
A few generations from here.
Oh, sorry. Okay,
Okay, did you see it there?
we did.
Okay. So what were some of the microaggressions that you saw?
I didn't catch what the one was between the two men toward the beginning.
So the evidently they had spoken, the two men had spoken, and then the one was surprised, I guess, at the appearance
Oh, okay.
of the other. And so his comment was, oh, something about, I thought you'd look different, something like that.
Okay.
I'll give you another example. Our president wears jeans and sometimes a jacket or jeans and a media shirt a lot. So some people may not realize he's our president on our campus.
Yeah.
He's probably our most casually dressed president, but I mean, I think the students think he's very approachable that way. But most of our other presidents wore suits. I never saw Mr. Summers anything but a suit. And so that would be an example of that.
The guy with the woman and the man at the very end, where she's asking where like he's from because of the color of his skin. He's trying to say, I was born here, I'm from here. I actually get that a lot because of my name. There's some people, oh, I've heard it before, oh, I wasn't expecting you to be like this, or are you American, or, you know, my name's Sohaila, so it's obviously not like a basic American name, it does originate from somewhere else, but, yeah, I get that one a lot as well, so I can relate to him.
Thank you for sharing.
And I want to share with you that I apologize for my problem again, same thing last time we were here, is that one way that I was taught to ask a question appropriately about where someone is from is to ask the question differently and simply ask, so where did you grow up as a child? And that is more curiosity of like, what's your hometown? And it's not assuming anything, it's just asking. And so if that's something you really need to know, rather than assuming, saying, where are you from? Well, maybe you grew up in India and you moved here. Maybe you grew up down the street. But it does help a little bit. And that's just a tidbit for you to be aware of.
That's a great tidbit. And what was even more powerful was when Jody said, if it's something that you really need to know. And that's one of the things that we have to remind ourselves when we are confronted with people that are different than we are, and we're curious. We would just maybe like to know some things about them. I mean, we're a curious people. We like to know things about people, but we have to be careful that some of those questions that won't be perceived or may be perceived with underlying meaning. And so that's what we're going to look at next. Jody, are you able to bring up the slides again?
Yes, ma'am.
So we're going to take a look at these slides, and we're going to talk a little bit about how someone may sort of construe what we're saying here. So let's talk about these microaggressions. A professor says to an Asian American student, I'm very surprised that you don't understand this complex math. Now, what do you think? Is that a microaggression?
Yeah.
And if so, what's the message behind that statement?
It's using the stereotype because you're Asian, you must be good at math.
Exactly. So what they've done is that professor has then ascribed intelligence to race. So if I believe that because you're Asian American, you must be very proficient in math, then that same professor probably has some thoughts then about race and who's not proficient in math. So the next one, a manager says to an employee who's a person of color, that's what that POC is, you will go far in this company because you are smart, articulate, and clean. Is that a microaggression?
No.
That's not a microaggression, okay.
It kind of is, it's kind of assuming the stereotype that people of color are not very smart, they don't have good communication skills, and they're not clean. I mean,
yeah, I get that. I agree. Now that I read it again.
Yeah. And more than, go ahead, Jody.
I was just going to say, this is an example of intent versus impact, that the person might not think that it's a big deal and say, oh, I just complimented you. Well, where's it coming from? You know, what brought that to the forefront, that those three things were important because I'm a person of color. So it's just, sometimes it's the nuances that Joy was talking about when we first started discussing microaggressions.
Absolutely. The person who speaks to their physically disabled coworker in loud, short sentences as if they can't hear or comprehend. Is that a microaggression?
They assume that just because they have a physical disability, they're deaf and obviously not smart. Yeah, then, it's wrong.
That's right. That's a microaggression as well. And so there's an it suggests that there's an underlying belief there that this person's intelligence is affected by their physical ability, or in this case, a disability. And then,
And
go ahead.
also within that, if a person is speaking to the person, if they're in a wheelchair and they don't get down to their level and squat or bend over or sit in another chair, that's also, I think, a microaggression toward people in wheelchairs. They may not know it, but it is.
Okay, Student Support Services says to a student in a hijab, which is, you'll find that sometimes people with certain faith beliefs will wear a head covering. It's sort of a head covering. It's 80 degrees. Aren't you hot? It's 80 degrees outside. Aren't you hot in that thing? Is that a microaggression?
Yeah. Yeah, something like that.
I think it would be because that's their religion, and we're ridiculing their religion and their beliefs. Although we see it more on TV now, there's someone on the Food Network channel on the Spring Baking Off, and she has one of these on. And I've seen it on a couple other things. I think it's becoming more pronounced. I think like on Project One, they had one. So it's nice when we see on TV people being not ridiculed for these things and being society more accepting and educating us. We do not have that religious establishment around here. So we wouldn't, I mean, we probably wouldn't know what that was if we didn't have it on TV, because we haven't experienced it.
So in my case, I think I would have one of those accidental pieces, because when I read that, I thought that would, how would that be a microaggression? Because if someone, a Caucasian person was wearing a sock hat, I would think the same thing, but I get it.
So I didn't quite hear that comment, and it sounds though like a comment that we should probably discuss. Candace, can you repeat that or have him repeat it?
Yes, I can repeat it. When I first read it, I thought that's not a microaggression, because if a Caucasian person is wearing a sock hat on an 80-degree day, I might make the same comment, but then after they're talking, I see that it is. So.
Yeah, and you know what? That's an excellent point. Sometimes we just don't know. Sometimes we don't really understand the significance. And in those cases, those are the cases that we talked about where it's very appropriate to apologize. You know, ideally, and we'll talk about this a little later in the presentation, ideally that student would have an opportunity to talk the offender through why that's so offensive. But we're not going to require them to do that. And we'll, like I said, we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the conversation. But sometimes we're going to make those mistakes. And the great thing is it's okay. It's okay to make those mistakes because we're going to apologize. But then I'm going to give you a challenge in just a moment. I heard somebody else say something else.
I did. So when you were talking at the beginning about this, that we grew up in this and we learned these microaggressions or statements. And I think that's one thing why we want students to be exposed and to attend college. Because, and I know that we know better not to do those microaggressions, but when you grow up in that family, in that culture, in that community, and that's acceptable. I mean, it doesn't mean that it's acceptable throughout society, but it's hard for some students then when they go back home, when they've learned these things and then they're taught maybe their, what is that? Because oh, like a skinhead, you know, coming to college and then going back home, and they would probably know not to bring a black girlfriend home with a name, because they learned that it's not that person is okay, and that's what I'm hoping. You know, when they come to college, they see that maybe their parents and their culture didn't always see things in a kind manner.
Mhm.
And but it's hard to break those stigmas that you grow up in. Does that make sense? So it's kind of hard when you're been indoctrinated. I have seen students who have been indoctrinated with those. I don't know, I hate to call them values, but beliefs. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what this makes me think of is what happened here in Washington, D.C., when they stormed the U.S. Capitol. And as someone who's lived here for over 40 years, I'm watching this and I thought, oh my gosh, some of the things people were saying, what was on their signs, it's like, where does this come from? Because many of them are young people. And it is that indoctrination, that negativity, that belief, you know, I'm going to use the term white supremacy, that there has to be a certain way to the world, or else it has to go. And so it's very difficult also because that's prevalent in the media. So how do we help children, teenagers, and then again, you hope that college is a place to shift ideas and shift mindset and perspective. And it isn't always that way, which is one of the reasons Joy and I appreciate being able to be here with all of you, because there is a shift at Vincennes, and that's fantastic.
Absolutely. Yeah. Candace, you're so right on when you talk about sort of these influences that we all grow up with. And let me just, you know, certainly when I think about, you know, some of the bias and all, and there's this, you know, whole debate about who could be biased and who's not biased, who could be racist, who's not racist, you know, in terms of groups of people. You know, but I grew up with grandparents who, well, I didn't grow up with my grandparents, but when I visited my grandparents who lived in the South, in Alabama, they had a very interesting viewpoint of Caucasian people. Now, my grandmother was born in, I think, 1905. My grandfather, I think, was born in 1903, somewhere around there. And so they had a different impression of Caucasian people than I did, who in the 70s graduated from a school that was majority Caucasian. An entirely different viewpoint. But I love my grandparents, and they were you know, they mentored me, they loved me, I valued their opinions and all, but sometimes we have to know that as much as we love grandma and grandpa and, uncles and the people in our lives, that their worldview is just not the way it should be. Because of course, my grandparents had a very narrow, neither one of them finished high school. So they had their world was very narrow. And the Caucasians that they had come into contact with, mostly people that they worked for, because my grandmother was a domestic, she cleaned houses. My grandfather worked at a coal mine in Alabama. And so their experiences were vastly, vastly different than the experiences that I've had. So I guess what I'm saying is, when we grow up with those things, we certainly have to have a sense of compassion for those people who raised us and loved us and really kind of taught us the best that they thought that they were doing. But we know too that we are oftentimes very better educated than they were, better aware. And then I would challenge you, all of us, because even at my advanced age, I'm still on this journey. Jody's still on this journey. We don't get to stop learning about this.
Never.
So, certainly I learned some things when I was in high school, when I was in college, sort of growing up in my 20s and 30s. But even at my older age now, I'm still on a journey to find out about, to learn and to find out about these things, to learn about people, to increase my sort of cultural awareness. And we talk about being aware. Yeah, we can be aware that there are differences in people, but we also have to be culturally sensitive. We have to be sensitive to those differences as well. The what's with your hair kind of thing. So we have to be sensitive to those things, know that there are differences, and then we also have to be competent when we deal with people, culturally competent, knowing that there's a way to do everything. Jody gave you a suggestion of how you can maybe find out some more information about somebody that you're curious about, because that curiosity is natural curiosity. So there's a way to handle that. So comments, what are you all thinking before we move on?
I have asked people where are you from? And I didn't know that was a microaggression until I went through this workshop with you guys last semester. I had a friend in college who was Black from New York, and I felt like I learned things from him. I felt like I could ask him anything. Why do I see a lot of Black people that do whatever, and he did not take offense to it. He knew that I wanted to be educated. And so he never was offended by it. And as far as I know anyway, but that's something that was good about me going to college though, one thing, because I'm from an all-white town. And then also there was a guy who his girlfriend worked on campus, and he taught me a lot of things that I didn't know. It was just in conversation. I forget how we got on the subject, but he taught me different things about, just say it's different things.
Yeah, and I think, Justin, that was probably the reverse as well. I'm sure that there were questions that he had for you, things that were different, things that seemed different, things that didn't seem the norm. So those are the relationships that we sort of need to have, where we can ask those questions in a safe and secure place, but we can't just walk up to someone and say that. There's nothing wrong with saying, where are you from? Because I'm always, when I lived in New Jersey, I was always looking for another Texan. Where are you from? Where are you from? But what I have to do, if I want to say, no, where are you really from? I have to stop and question myself. what's your intent here? Are you trying to find out if they are, if they were born in outside of the States? You know, what's my intent? And that's the advice that I would give. We always sort of have to stop ourselves and ask ourselves, what's my intent? And could this be taken differently than I intended?
Exactly.
I think sometimes, and gosh, I hope not here with us, but I've heard it in other places because we're talking about workplace. Sometimes in interviews, they'll ask questions similar to that about trying to find out without coming outright and asking maybe religion or sexual orientation and trying to find those things, even though we're not supposed to. And that's kind of difficult when you're trying to, you're looking for your first job or you're looking for a job and you're in one of those marginalized groups. And that's hard for some of our students.
Yeah. That's hard for people that have been in the workplace for a while, because like Candace said, they're not supposed to. It's illegal to ask certain questions. But employers will, they also know sometimes how to dance around that, how to get around it and ask those questions to see whether or not you're going to sort of fit into the culture of the company. And so those are questions designed to sort of weed people out. And it is difficult. I know it's difficult as a 21, 22-year-old going into that environment and being asked some of those questions. Because it's difficult for people who are seasoned, for veteran folks that have worked for a while and all as well. Jody alluded to some of the psychological toll of microaggressions, and I just wanted to tell you that studies have been shown that people who are subject, not just people, even elementary students who are subject to consistent microaggressions, that they've exhibited depression and certain psychological problems on the job. If someone works in a job where microaggressions are allowed, then oftentimes they find that employees that are victims of microaggressions are less productive, and they're working in what we call a sort of a hostile work environment, which means that they're unable to do their work because they're so upset and so worried about some of the things that are leveled at them. And these are sort of little things that you all are probably too young to remember when Tiger Woods won the Masters. So he's for the first time, I believe, and one of the experienced golfers said to him, because I guess the winning golfer gets to choose what they have for lunch. And the winning golfer, one of the older golfers, said to him, what are you going to serve? Fried chicken? Now that was a microaggression on the world stage when this young man had just won the Masters. He was at the pinnacle and he had just won, and then someone committed this microaggression against him. So those kinds of things put people in a situation where they're experiencing hostility, and employers have to protect you from that. It's been long known that women who work in male-dominated environments oftentimes suffer microaggressions in the forms of inappropriate jokes, in the form of being called inappropriate names like, and you're going to say, that's not inappropriate, sweetheart or baby, those kinds of things. And you think, well, that's not inappropriate. Well, you might think it inappropriate if she called the men sweetheart or baby. So we have to consider that even in this place where we have professional people who should know better, that these microaggressions do occur.
Absolutely.
If you were in a male-dominated field and they were calling you kind or yeah, that's what I was going to say. How do you respond? Thank you. Sorry, I was jumping ahead.
Absolutely. So,
So
yes,
do you want me
so-
to play this?
yes, let's take a look
Perfect.
at this video.
I read your mind, Candace. It's okay. I hope you can hear this. I took off my AirPod buds, which I think were the cause.
Oh yeah, there it is. It's coming.
You hear it?
Oh, I don't hear it.
Okay. Let's try one more time and then I'll just send the link to Justin. No?
No.
Okay, let me send you the link, Justin. I don't know why that's happening. I do this stuff all the time. Let's see.
It's something that I always had the majority.
You talk.
Yeah.
I guess I'm still learning how to deal with these progressions with mental illness and being a Black. Wow, this is one. It's something that I always had the majority of my progressions that I've experienced in my life are related to being half Japanese. People often say that I am a Black girl, for example. Or if you're not like, I'm home. That was me. I'm Black in New York. Like, oh my God, from your name. It's probably be a little Jack walking on the street. Oh, you're super pretty for Black. You know, a lot of people that want to touch hair. They will actually really like, oh, that's you care.
Yeah, but I'm going to touch parents.
You guys want to touch parents.
I'm a tactile person.
You know, like, when you biggest one I get.
A little bit.
They ran a lot. They ran a lot.
You know, what are you know, what you have. So
I wonder if this storm is affecting
it
him.
has to be that because it's not that bad.
I never have trouble playing this.
It's really not an issue.
Joy, should we continue since the video is not working?
Yes.
Do that. Just, we picked up on some of them.
Let it go or close it out?
Close the party, how people tell you.
So I did want to, I thought I heard someone say that was mean. Were you all able to view a couple of them? And if so, tell me what kind of spoke to you there.
Girl, the one we said that to was, you're awful pretty or cute for a Black girl.
Yep.
Oh, that was horrible.
Yep. Anything else that comes up for anyone else?
I would ask someone with dreads if I could touch them. Because I'm a very tactile person, I've never seen people with dreads. Well, I mean, I've seen them, but not on this campus usually. But I'd be careful about it. But if I got to know them in Coke, and I'd say, wow. And then I'd ask them, how do you wash it? And then I'd say, I'm very curious. But I'm like Justin, I want to learn. And wait, I don't know. I have to probably shake my head after I dreads because you can't get it back on. I just think it's, and then that one guy's hair was beautiful. I'm just like, you're envious. I would say things like that because it's true. He was beautiful hair. James was focused on the hair. I know.
So I want to share something from the place of curiosity that again I've learned over time is that what I've been hearing in response to questions, which some people don't appreciate yet, and I get it, is that rather than asking those questions, unless it's someone you have, like Justin, you had a close relationship with your friend. When you don't have a close relationship, the response is to Google it. I have been in presentations, in workshops, at conferences, and most of the presenters of color would say, please stop asking me. I am not your encyclopedia. You need to learn the same way that we have been forced to learn and shift toward your white ways. And that's the harsh reality for white people. And it's absolutely the truth. It doesn't mean you can't have conversations. It's just a question of when and how. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Joy.
Sure, there's a time and a place. I agree with that. Because I mean, I would wait until I get to know them or something like that, or and then I can also tell if people are touchy feely or not too. But
Yeah, I think the key. I think the key here is to understand that some of those questions will make people feel as if you think they're different or weird or other. So we just have to be very careful about those questions. Like Jody said, when those questions are not asked of someone that you have a relationship with. Now, what we talked about was sort of managing these situations. How do we do it? Well, we've got 3 different sort of groups of people. The victim, we've got the bystander, and then we've got sort of a the aggressor themselves. So let's sort of talk about these. First of all, if you're the victim of a microaggression, try to breathe. Just try to breathe, because what happens is that mind just starts to race. So just try to breathe, and that WDYM, the response could be, what do you mean? Now, there doesn't have to be a response, but if you want to respond, it could just simply be, what do you mean? Now, a lot of times people will say, I just wanted to get away from there. I didn't want to say anything else to that person. And absolutely, as the victim of a microaggression, that is allowed. That's exactly, that's right. And you don't have to feel bad about that at all. The inform is to not inform someone of, not educate them. It's to let them know that you are insulted, that you've been offended. Again, if you want to. Again, on the victim, educate, question mark. Not the responsibility of the victim to educate anyone who commits a microaggression against them. But certainly feel free to vent to trusted allies. I can't believe what someone said to me today. So vent to people who understand microaggressions, who know, and that ally can be any ally. I could vent to Jody, even though Jody and I may not have the you know, the whatever the area of the microaggression, we might not have that in common. I can still vent to her because I know that she understands. So that's the victim. The bystander. Because how many of you have been in a situation where you've heard something and you've thought, oh, you know it's not quite right. You know that, you know, it's an awkward moment. You know that somebody said something that they shouldn't have said. So as a bystander, again, breathe. And then you as the bystander could turn and say, well, what do you mean? To the aggressor. Now, then you as the bystander could inform, because it's easier to inform and educate when you're not in the middle of those feelings, of those emotions. You know, what do you mean? Do you understand that that was an insult? That's called a microaggression. So feel free to inform and educate, and then feel free to empathize with the victim. You know, I'm really sorry. I was in a situation where someone turned to me and said, you know, that person, you know, is well, they call the person ignorant. That person is just ignorant. And ignorant in that case meant they were just uninformed. They just don't know. So they weren't making excuses for that person, but they empathized and they validated that what I was feeling was correct. So as a bystander, that's what I'm challenging us to do. Have any of you been bystanders and seen something like this happen? And if so, tell us about that situation.
I see it with students or people with disabilities all the time. And especially individuals with a learning disability. And I just come back right with them and I'll say, but the definition of a learning disability means they have an average or above average IQ, and they can also be gifted. And I just wham it right back at them. Because, I mean, it happens. Especially when they're hidden disabilities. Sometimes I think I see in our college too, many of the female STEM majors having microaggressions in their fields. Girls can't do that job. We're going to have to carry her. I've heard that.
Well, and that brings up something for me, Candace, as you say it. Oftentimes, the aggressor does not directly attack the victim, but does the, you know, behind their back routine with the bystander. And, you know, I think of people with mental illness, someone who is depressed. I know professionally and personally that when a person is depressed, the worst thing you're going to say is, would you just get over it? Just do what you need to do. Just shake it off. That is so hurtful, because the only thing that that person wants to do is shake it off, and they can't. It's a chemical change in the brain. And so to be able to turn around as a bystander, whether or not the victim is there, and say, you know, what did you mean by that? And also, I'm curious, what's your understanding of depression? Because it's one of those things that if you've never been there, you don't get it. And help to educate them, because that is one of the issues. And I would say for many of you, for students, it's a problem because it's a shameful thing. And whether it's a learning disability or having depression or anxiety, and people who don't understand it will just flippantly say, a professor might say, well, just get it done. That's not an excuse, get your work done. Not understanding truly the impact of having a mental illness. So that's a different type, but it's also about how you can still have a conversation with the aggressor without the victim present.
How would you do that in a work setting? Because I agree with that mental health illness. And the increase with it, along with COVID, is huge in college campuses as well as throughout the United States.
Yes.
Had some research papers done on this. And there's such a negative stigma associated with mental health illnesses. Now, I know that many facilities are trying to, educate employers. Like with the Business Leadership Network is really trying to do that throughout the United States. But many businesses still don't want to do that, and that's why I think many new employees or employees will disclose that they have a mental health illness because of how they're going to be treated, and it's difficult, and it is tough because it's once again it's a hidden disability too.
Mm-hmm.
And they wouldn't be treated like that. Well, they may. Some people may treat people with in a wheelchair the same, but typically it's odd that they'll. And I see it the most with that, but maybe it's because I work with those types of, those students the most with hidden disabilities, ridicule and microaggressions against them a lot.
I can kind of relate with you on Candace. If you might be able to relate to being in counseling and dealing with this as well. When I was up at Indiana State, that's where I'm going to transfer to. It's another college for my bachelor's degree. And I was in there trying to figure out house and stuff. And I said, I have an animal. He's in service training right now, but he's a registered emotional support animal. And he can't be a service animal until he completes training, but he's my diabetic alert dog. And he has to be with me, like at least in the house. Like I can't go out with him yet because he's not a service animal. But when I was talking to this lady, I said, I have an emotional support animal. What can I do to get him to live and reside with me? And she said along the lines of, well, he's just an emotional support animal, like you might not be able to have him because anybody can have that. And I'm like, well, I understand that. I know there's some people that say they need an emotional support animal and they really just want their animal, but there's also people that really rely on this animal to come home to make them feel better. Petting your animal could be a reason why you don't go home and do something harmful to yourself. And there's a really negative stigma now with people with emotional support animals thinking they just want their dog. They just want to have their animal with them. La-di-da-di-da. And I'm like, trust me, I don't want my dog everywhere with me where I go. I don't want to play with his poop everywhere. I don't want his hair everywhere. I love him to death, but he is a distraction at school, but I have to have him with me because it helps me so much. And I've noticed that a lot lately with mental health as well, especially being just diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. He helps me in that way as well as an emotional support animal. So just like those microaggressions and generalization will kind of tie in with the other people, which really threw me off when she said that. Like everybody can. You might not get away with that because everybody can just have those, like as an excuse for people to actually need one. So,
and I think that's the hard part because on our campus, our person in charge of disability services understands, I think, differently than many other campuses. And we have a lot of emotional support animals on campus. Mm-hmm. And a lot of other supports that students don't have, and accommodations that our students with disabilities don't have to fight all the time, which is, I think, a good thing.
Yeah, when I was granted my support animal, she was so sweet, so understanding. And I had a letter from my doctor. She was like, all right, good to go. Just make sure you take care of them. I don't know what like the big deal is as long as you take care of them, you know? Yeah. Yeah.
Just stay nice.
That's a, thank you for sharing that. I'm sorry you had to go through that, but that's a perfect example of microaggressions and intolerance, and how it sort of manifests itself in these microaggressions. And there's been I see the microaggressions against support animals, not recently because I haven't been traveling, but certainly prior to COVID, I noticed some of that among airline workers who seem to roll their eyes at emotional support animals, and certainly not all airline workers, but there were a couple of airline workers that seemed to be giving a lady a hard time who had an emotional support animal. So, okay.
Absolutely.
So victim, bystander, let's talk about the aggressor.
Am I on the right slide now?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I'm just watching, making sure. Is everyone good to stay for another, what are we, 20 minutes?
Yes.
Good.
Okay, so yeah, okay. So, and it probably won't even take 20 minutes. So let's say you slip up and you say something. You know, you may say something like, you may be, you just may slip up and say something. So what do? Well, breathe. And you'll notice that all of these situations begin with breathe, and just acknowledge, oh my goodness, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. You know, I apologize. And then be silent. Because at that point, you're probably going to have someone who then, you know, the victim or maybe a bystander who wants to say their piece. They want to let you know how they felt. They may want to. And if they do, just be silent, listen. And then if it moves into sort of a sharing and educating, again, let that person talk about their experience and just thank them from sharing and educating. You don't have to let them know that, you know, you were brought up in a household where bias was rampant. You don't have to let them know that you know who you really are. I'm really not that person. You don't have to make excuses. Just apologize and then let them take the lead. Thank them for educating you. And but the main thing there is listen, and then take that lesson and learn from that lesson. And that's when, like Jody said, Googling information is very helpful. Depending on friends that can help educate you, you know, close relationships with friends who are willing to help educate you, do that. But it's a humbling experience, but being humble is the way to go.
Do we have time for that? I can share an experience, Joy?
Absolutely.
So about a year ago, I committed a microaggression against someone who I care about and a person of color. And yet in that moment, I had no idea that I had done it. We were with a group of people. It was a, you know, conversation that was going on, and I was unaware. I'm not using that as an excuse. I'm just being flat out honest. I had no idea that the conversation sounded uncomfortable, but I didn't know what that discomfort was. And so the meeting ended, I went home, and the next couple of days, I was told how horrible I was in saying what I said. And I was taken aback. And I apologized. I said, honestly, I had no idea. Thank you for telling me. I apologize for offending you and hurting you. That was not my intention, but that doesn't matter. What matters is the impact. And the impact is that I hurt you very deeply. That was one of the worst days I can remember during the time that I have been doing this work over the last 6-7 years, very, deep dive into working in the social justice arena. And yet that was the best learning experience for me. And I had had subsequent talks with the individual. Her response was, we're okay because I have respect for the fact that you're doing your work, that you acknowledge that you had no clue. You thought you knew, but you had no clue what you did or said, and you're doing your work. So I share that because I'm still here. This is someone I work with closely, and we are in a good space. But I made a mistake, a huge mistake, and I needed to acknowledge it in the moment, which I didn't do because I didn't know it happened. But then as soon as I was confronted with it, it was okay. So it doesn't matter if it's in the moment or, as Joy's saying, the follow-up, do something. Acknowledge that it was wrong and that it was hurtful, and don't give any excuses. That is the biggest mistake you can ever make. So I'm here to tell the story.
Thank you for sharing that. So I am, I've presented all of the material that I have. I'm just wondering if anyone in the room has something that's coming up for them. And if not, then I'll turn it back over to Jody.
Okay. Anything that anyone wants to share before we talk about, well, I'd love to know your takeaways. We have time for takeaways and looking at where we go from here.
I like that you gave us a question. When we see someone doing this, we can say, what did you mean? Or is that what do you mean? And that gives us something to come back with while we process. Plus it makes them accountable, but nicely. And hope I don't forget that in the moment.
Great. What else?
This actually happened to me recently, just a quick story. One of my closest friends, she's not really religious, and but she's still my best friend, and I'm glad that we can still be best friends and have our differences respectively. But she said something along the lines of putting it nicely, that Christians are stupid, and but she said it in a discreet way. I can't remember exactly how she said it. And I did look at her and I said, what do you mean? And she looked at me like with the biggest eyes and realized what she had just said. Like, because I don't know if she'd forgotten in the moment, if I'm religious, of who she might have offended that was around that heard that, or if she just didn't care that she offended me, or if she just wanted to say, like, I know that I'm not super religious, but here's my take. And I will say that, saying that, kind of, what do you mean by that? In a way, or what do you mean? That really helped her, and she realized, oh man, I'm sorry. I should probably have kept that to myself. And I was like, yeah, you should. You probably should have. But I also heard one, and I wanted to ask a question to you guys. I've also heard the response of, I personally am very bad at speaking up for myself if someone hurts my feelings. I usually kind of just like let it slide and don't say anything. But I've been trying to work on that, and I heard someone use a good response as in just holding them accountable by saying, well, that was kind of hurtful. And just saying that.
Yep.
Immediately, they know that you hurt their feelings and you took it seriously. Because it kind of takes them by surprise. As, man, I'm not a horrible person. I didn't mean to hurt people. That's usually the response that the other person feels. And I want to hear what you guys had to say about a response like that. If you just flat out saying, I was hurt by that. That was a hurtful comment and such along those lines.
It's a great way to acknowledge how you're feeling rather than let it build up. And you're helping the other person learn. I see it sort of as a place of generosity on your part, of being able and open and able to say, that hurt me, because you then opened the door for the person to learn. In the same way, had my colleague not said to me, what you did just made me feel like I had no support whatsoever as a person of color. And my first response was, thank you for telling me. And I am so sorry. And so the other person doesn't have to apologize to you, but we'd be like, oh, okay, that wasn't my intent, which is what a lot of people say. It's not as appropriate as just apologizing, but I think it's a gracious way of opening the door to greater conversation, helping other people learn, which is part of what Joy and I have been saying. Those next steps is keep listening, noticing, learning, sharing, go forward by being curious and open about this work. Thanks for asking that question.
Don't you think, Jody, because she said I was hurt by that, she used an I statement, and so then it wasn't you did this, and I think I statements help diffuse things, but it tells how you feel.
Yeah, absolutely, Candace. Makes a big difference.
I'm in an argument. I usually use I statements a lot, and it really helps.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Yeah. I use it on my husband. He tells me, stop that teacher talking.
When I was a student living on campus, I'm a Christian, and there was a guy who lived in the dorm that I lived in, and he had taped on his door, on the outside of his door, using it's like black duct tape. He taped an upside down cross, large, and then he had a t-shirt. His head was shaved, and he had a t-shirt that said on the back of it, "Christians off to the lions." And I'm sure there were people very offended by that, but I wanted to talk to him. And I never really did have a conversation other than like, hi, how you doing? But I mean, I wanted to have, because he seemed like he was really smart. I just got the impression that he was a smart guy, and I would have liked to have sat down and talked to him, and I wish that I would have. The opportunity has been lost. Maybe I'll run into him again someday. Maybe I'll run into him at church. And hopefully he doesn't wear that shirt there.
That's so true. And it's hard because, again, you're open to learning. And oftentimes those aggressors, microaggressors, will not want to say anything. And so rather than saying it, it's wearing the t-shirt, it's putting a sign out there, which intimidates people. So it's more intimidation than anything else, which does not leave that opening for conversation as much as you're ready for the conversation. So we have just a couple of minutes, and I don't want to lose anything. Any last questions or takeaways before we wrap?
No.
Oh, good. So we really invite you to keep going on this journey. Certainly, Joy and I hope that at some point we can keep having these conversations, even just to come back and have a discussion for an hour about what you've learned and what you've experienced. Meanwhile, we're here as a resource, and continue to talk to one another about this. And when you do hear something, it is that, sort of corny, when see something, say something, but it's true. If you notice that someone has committed a microaggression against you or someone else, speak up. And that's not easy. And we know that because there's fear behind it. But the idea is to put it out there. And when you put it out there, you can diminish some of the flame and the anger that's behind it by you throwing some water on it, just by bringing it up. So it's valuable. And there are resources that Justin and Candace and Nan have through our company and our resource library. And if you don't have, I know Justin has a link, but if anyone else needs it, Joy's been putting together some great information. So we have a library section on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And so anything that you might need, just reach out. Joy, is there anything you wanted to say before we say goodbye?
No, well, yes, I wanted to say thank you. It's always a pleasure to be with you all. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for challenging us. Thank you for your ideas.
Mhm.
And I certainly hope we have an opportunity to come back and spend some more time with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Same here.
Yeah, we're getting ready to